Yeah, it's Tracy introduced me. I'm Christine Towers. I think hopefully a few of you do know me. I have had a relationship with Merton and with the parents groups for a number of years now, including actually piloting the Thinking Ahead guide when it was first being developed about over 10 years ago now. Sally Burns was involved in that. So yeah, it's really nice to be back and talking more about Thinking Ahead guides. So I've just picked out, with discussion with Tracy, a few sections to talk about today from the guides. And so I'll go through this. I'll talk about cover in a minute. So just to say a little bit about Together Matters, I used to work at the Foundation for People with Learning Disabilities, and that's where I first had my contact with Merton. But 7 years ago, I set up Together Matters. And really what we're doing is focusing on planning for all kind of ages and stages of life. And if you do look at the website, we've got ideas under young people, adult life and growing older. And what we do really is create resources for people to plan for positive changes in their life, to think about what they'd like and look at how they can get that. We provide workshops and training, do consultancy and service development. And one of the things I really love doing is like getting stories, feedback from people about how they've used the guides. And I go on sort of sharing those with people. I keep on learning. Every time I do a workshop, I learn more about you know, how the guides can be used. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to do a little brief introduction of the Thinking Ahead guides for people who don't know them. And the three topics I'm going to focus on from the guides are making choices, then building friendships, community connections and support networks, then finding the right housing and support. We'll have a little break, as Tahina said, between each of them. So if you've got any questions or comments you want to make, that's fine. Then I'm just going to talk about a couple of other sets of resources on the website that I thought might be useful to know about. And then a bigger chunk of time at the end for discussion. So these are the Thinking Ahead guides. The blue guide on the left was the original planning guide that Merton Parents contributed to. And that's, it has quite a lot of information in it. It's sort of, you know, a lot of written information in there, trying to think about what families might want when planning for the future. So I'll talk a little bit more about what's in there. And then I'm Thinking Ahead came along a few years later, because when I wrote Thinking Ahead, it was very much encouraging the involvement of people with learning disabilities in the planning. But I just felt, oh, we all kind of need a tool to really help make that a lot easier. So it's an easy read format, and it's really to support people to have conversations. And that's been used quite widely actually across services, as well as by people with learning disabilities and their families. So this is what's in I'm Thinking Ahead. So it was written for young people and adults so that they could use it themselves or with support from someone, you know, whether it's a family member or a practitioner. And that's one thing that's really nice about it, that people can talk with a person about it from different perspectives and then pull that information together. So originally there were 3 sections: how to plan, how to make choices, how to get the right housing and support. So I'm going to look at the second 2 today. And then in end of 2021, a new section came out, how to be part of the world work, which actually I did a workshop for adults first a few years ago during COVID. And the whole idea of I'm Thinking Ahead really is helps others to talk more meaningfully with a person, so that people get a bit more space and time and the right means of communicating with them to find out what people want from life. And what I have to say, although I'm Thinking Ahead is written in easy read, that isn't for everyone, and I'm very aware of that. But if people who know a person well are using the ideas in the guide, they can just adapt that for a person's communication needs. And some people won't, you know, they wouldn't be able to think about the questions. But I'm going to talk a little bit later about circles of support, but I think that's where maybe a circle of people who can help someone to plan there, they will make best guesses about what a person's answer might be and test those out. So it's still very valid, the answers they might put into the, say, the templates in the guide. So this is the family guide. So as you can see, there's like 9 sections. They're each stand in their own right. So that was, you know, I don't want people to feel overwhelmed. That's a lot of information. People can just choose where they want to start, or just look at one section that's useful for them at the moment. So I'm going to be covering a few of those sections today and mentioning a few others as well. So I think the more I've used the guides, and the emphasis is on people planning for the future, but what does that mean? Because the future is tomorrow. I mean, the future's today, isn't it? It's not this thing that's way over there. Sometimes it is something that's a longer term future, but often the future is just tomorrow or the next few weeks, the next year. So I've really learned more and more that the guides really are often about conversations. And planning does sound daunting. I know it's often emotionally difficult. It's time difficult, to think about how to do some of this planning. But what I've realised that planning is basically these conversations that lead to change, and it doesn't really matter how small that change is. And what I've found is the guides are really helping people to have better conversations, including talking about difficult subjects. And parents often come back and say that once they've started to use the guide, they've just found a way in and had a conversation, and it's really opens up quite a lot of changes. So that's the other thing I've learned, that really a small change usually leads to opening up to looking at much bigger changes. And that's often partly other people getting involved in the conversations and opening up the discussion, and it not just sitting with parents, because I think that's quite hard when parents feel, they've got all the day-to-day stuff, plus they've got to, or they feel they should be looking at the future. So the other thing I really realised through COVID was about, how stressful. Well, obviously we went through a huge change, and change isn't often by choice. A lot of my work is about like positive change in people's life, but often change is forced upon people, and that can be really stressful for young people and adults and for family carers. Again, what I've really realised is that families often I do quite a lot of workshops with families, and they come back and say they just feel so much more empowered and less stressed, because they just feel they have a sense of how they can shape the future. And, they've got some ideas for moving forward, and that just is such kind of a huge relief to them. And I mean, one of the big things I think with Thinking Ahead was always that often families feel very dependent on services. You ask something and you wait for the reply, or you wait for someone to say, these are the options. But in a way, it's helping families to shape it much more themselves and go much better informed to services, and to sort of say, we've looked at this, we've talked about this, and this is what we're thinking. How can you respond to that? Or what are the options for what we're saying? And I think those sort of tools of that planning, they're not just one-off things. They can just go on being used throughout life, and that's true for people with learning disabilities. I think one of my sort of missions is that people with learning disabilities get a voice about a lot of things, and learn to speak up. Families support them with that, and then hopefully, or there's more chance that when families aren't around to do that, that the person knows that their voice should be heard, and that they've learned some ways of saying, that doesn't work for me, this is what I need. Whether it's, they're not, even if they're not able to say that, but that is written somewhere. That information is there for others to look at and share. So that was by way of introduction. I mean, normally I can spend about an hour or so introducing the guys, so it's kind of brief, but hopefully for those who don't know them, that gives you a bit of an understanding. So I'm going to start with just looking at the making decisions, making choices. So in the Thinking Ahead guide, the family guide, there's the first section of the guide is actually called Making Decisions. And this is what's in that. So that image on the left, that's the sort of picture for that section in the guide. And then this is the content that's in the guide. So understanding how decisions are made. And that's really explaining the Mental Capacity Act from a family point of view. Ideas about involving your relative in making decisions. It explains about best interest decisions, what that really means. What I've just been saying about involving other people in decisions about the future, trying to broaden out people who contribute to that if you possibly can. And then the looking at where others have authority to make decisions, such as the lasting power of attorney and the deputyship. So, I mean, I think the benefit of that is, many of you maybe are familiar with the Mental Capacity Act, but for people that aren't, particularly those families coming on from school and college, it's a very useful section, and actually some really good social workers. I do a lot of work in Essex and did training for the 16 to 25 teams, among others. and they're sort of using that as a way of families going through leaving school, explaining to them about the Mental Capacity Act, because sometimes it's just not really explained to families, and they're suddenly hit with, oh, there's this thing called the Mental Capacity Act. So I think decision making is basically fundamental to the Thinking Ahead guide, which is why it was the first section, and lots of the other chapters are about that decision making. So things like where a person might live, who they might live with, how they may be supported, how their finances will be managed, what opportunities they want to look for, such as, you know, in education or in looking for work, and who will be an advocate and keep an eye on things in the future. So the section in which I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about is how to make choices. So this is in the I'm Thinking Ahead guide. So this is all the easy read information. So this is these four things here are the four sort of questions, discussion points in the how it's divided up. So I should say in how to make choices, there's a bit of an explanation about an idea, and then there's a sort of template for people to think through and kind of record their thoughts. Obviously, for people to help them do that, most people would need support to do that. So I'm going to look at these in a bit more detail, some of these in a bit more detail, but there's what choices do you make in your life? Who helps you to make choices? Are there other people you could ask to help you make choices? And what else would help you, you know, to make choices? I'll just look at a few of those, look at a sense of what it looks like. So this is how to make the choices I make, the first bit of this section. So it's got more pages of this, but it's divided up into, so a picture of, you know, an area where someone might make a choice, such as what they wear, what they eat, looking after their money, looking after their health. So there's a section to ask to write down the choices they already make. Are there other choices they'd like to make about that? Kind of what stops that? So it's just, I know that's what looks quite formal, but that's what it is, doesn't mean, you know, just going through it like that, but that is the aid to a conversation about that. And that has led to quite interesting, well, very interesting discussions for people about what some of the barriers are, which the barriers might be themselves. You know, I don't feel very confident about that, you know, so often these things are about confidence, but often about opportunity as well. So it really just opens up a discussion about, are people wanting to make more choices about things in their life? And I think the purpose of this really is to encourage people to make choices. I think people learn to speak, often do learn that other people will make choices for them. They look to other people, whether it's a teacher, a parent, you know, whoever it is, you know, a supporter, to answer questions sometimes, or to say what they think people want to know. So it's a way of people getting used to making smaller decisions, smaller choices, and then it helps them to make bigger choices, bigger decisions. Because I think we often do ask people to make quite big choices in their life, and they haven't really had much practice, and I completely at sea with it. People often say this to me, say parents have said, like, you know, their son or daughter at college being asked, do you want to get a job? Well, you know, that's just a huge question, and, you know, quite unstructured. So it's breaking some of that thinking down. And one of the things I just think, the more people, even if people don't, you know, only engage with this in a small way, but getting that sense that people do want to hear what I say, what I want, gives people a bit more confidence about thinking people want to hear their voice, you know, in services and things. And then that really helps to keep people safe. People need to feel confident about speaking up, you know, when things aren't going right, etc. So the next bit is people who help me make choices. So the idea of this was really to learn a little bit about what helps people to make choices. And I've learned so much about people from using this, these sort of questions. And I sometimes think, just what I've said, really, people are asked to make choices without the people knowing them, who are asking them to make a choice, don't really know how they make a choice, what would be their preferred way of being asked that. And just how much, things like how much time people need. People might need time to go away and think about things. I don't want to answer a question straight away. That it's quite unusual to be asked that question. So I need time to go away and maybe check it out with my mum and dad or whatever it might be. But I think if we can really build these pictures up of what helps someone make a decision, then that's something that can get written down and can be shared with other people. And say maybe when people, social workers or people are coming to do assessments and things like that, that reviews, you know, or people being faced with big choices, people can say, oh, hang on a minute, this is what we know about how, say, Christine makes a choice, so we need to do X, Y, and Z, not present it like that. So yes, but this has been really helpful for thinking about that. I kind of think a bit like a choice passport in the way of health passports, communication passports. I'm not saying it needs to be formal like that, but that kind of thinking and that information, I think, just does need to be available for most people. Right. So that was me around the making choices and making decisions. Okay, so the next section, and it isn't sequentially the next section, but the section 3 in Thinking Ahead, the Blue Family Guide, is called Building Friendships and Support Networks. And again, I should just say, Thinking Ahead is now 10 years old. So there are things in it I would write differently now. I've learned a lot from it being out there, and it's sort of one of my plans. How do I sort of update some of the sections? One of the things I have done, there isn't a section in I'm Thinking Ahead on this, but what I have done in the world of work, how to be part of the world of work, is include some ideas about sort of building community connections. So some of the ideas that I would probably put into Thinking Ahead now, I've sort of put into there, but I'm going to talk about that. So this is what's in the Thinking Ahead guide. It was really emphasising the importance of friendships and support networks for people. Thinking Ahead was originally written much more for families who were, I'd say, getting older and wondering who was going to do all the things that they do. So it was like trying to explain how, like, pulling people into someone's life now could help to, you know, improve the likelihood that people would have people there who help, you know, secure their future, keep, you know, just be an advocate for them, etc. It talks a lot about involving siblings. This idea I mentioned before about building a network of friends or a circle of support. So it talks quite a lot about a circle of support. It's something I think's got a bit lost in learning disability services. It was something when I worked at the Foundation, we did lots of training around helping both families and support workers develop circles of support. And it talks about advocacy as well. So that is available just to download on its own from the website. So that's just to be a bit clear about that. So it talks about the importance of friendships and support networks. And I do think friendships and support networks get a bit lost in the lives of people with learning disabilities. People miss out on those opportunities that most of us have to make friends. But friends, if we think about our own lives, they're so important to make our life go well. And you know, some of the things, having other people involved in your life, you know, it gives you ideas, they share their contacts, they create opportunities, they're people to do things together with. And that's the kind of nice side of life. But they also look out for people, you know, your friends look out for you. They notice, you know, whether they're safe and speak up when things are not right. Sometimes it's other people who notice, oh, you know, Christine doesn't look so well at the moment, or you know, Christine seems quite unhappy at the moment. So it's really important to have those people there. Obviously, you know, you're doing lots of that, but it's getting other people there with that similar commitment, so that, you know, you feel that that's a bit of a shared responsibility. And it really helps at stressful, difficult times. I mean, I think COVID again really brought that home. But, you know, when you move house, if you're not well, bereavement, it's really nice to have people who know who you are and will, again, look out for you, get in touch. And I think that I don't think services put enough thinking into how they build, say, friendships into support plans. They're not a substitute for paid support. People need the paid support they need. But actually, some things in our life, or in a person's life, it's kind of, it feels more natural to have that kind of support with, you know, friends or a support, more informal support network. Other things, it feels more important that it is paid support. So these are just some of the things that are in the Thinking Ahead guide. So, I mean, some people actually with learning disabilities are incredibly sociable, and they naturally draw others into their lives, whilst others find it harder, and some people find it extremely hard. So it's, you know, obviously it varies incredibly, really. But friendships are often based on shared interests. So one of the ideas is looking out for other places where someone can meet other people that share those interests. They can talk about things or do things related to an interest. And I think sometimes we do think friendships are with other people with learning disabilities, and those are really important. But, you know, there is more potential, I think, for people having friendships with other people. And it's like finding someone to be part of a support network who has skills. Finding someone who actually gives support. So if there is paid support, think about, do they have skills in connecting with other people, and, you know, could introduce and support conversations for someone who finds it difficult. So, I mean, sometimes I'm often saying this, you know, people get funded to go to an activity and they go with a support worker. So they go there and then they come back again and they've related to each other. I know this, you know, parents talk about this and it being very frustrating really when they see it. But, you know, if that support worker is good at connecting with other people, they might start some of those conversations. They might initiate things. They might look for opportunities in places where they go to actually just talk to more people and get other people involved in a person's life, or meet up with other friends. So two sets of paid supporters meet together and with the person they're supporting. And it also talks about befriending services, advocacy groups, and, you know, volunteering work, etc. So just thinking about what might work for your son or daughter or your relative. It does talk about social media. I think we've really moved on in this since the guide was written, but I still think it's important. I know some families really feel quite nervous about social media because, you know, abuse does happen on social media. It can make people vulnerable. So this was really just to say there are some guides out there. So the top one was something when I was at the Foundation for People with Learning Disabilities that we wrote with people with learning disabilities. It was part of a hate crime project that we did, and this problem with social media came up, and we wrote some guidelines. It's a little bit out of date now. It talks about Skype rather than Zoom. I don't think people use Skype anymore. Anyway, and also on Anne Craft Trust, there's just a link to some other resources if you want to have a look at, you know, ways of just thinking about online safety, really. So I mentioned about involving siblings, nieces, nephews. One of the things I say a lot in Thinking Ahead is trying to involve people of the same generation in discussions about planning, thinking what a person might do, or bigger questions about the future. So, you know, as parents, we have a certain set of ideas, but often people of a younger generation, they bring, you know, useful knowledge and experience from their own planning they've done for their future, and they have really helpful ideas. I know families sometimes feel we can't, you know, we don't want to ask them to be involved in this, but actually I think often siblings just say, I'm so glad, when their parents start to talk to them about these things, which goes, siblings can feel left out of conversations, but they still worry about their relatives' future. You know, even if they're not part of the conversation, it doesn't stop you worrying. And I think what's really important to recognise is this shared sense of family history, and especially as parents get older, you know, it's really nice if there's a strong bonds in that younger generation. And I know this is often difficult, and families are often living long ways away and all this kind of thing. But some of the things I'm talking about go on to talk about may just help with thinking about how this might be possible. So circle of support, I've mentioned this a few times, is where, and they can take many shapes and many forms. And, you know, it's actually probably a sort of 2-hour session on itself, but I just to maybe, if it seems a useful thing, I just wanted to touch on it. But it's really a circle of people, a circle of support's a group of people who have a commitment to a person, and they come together to sort of share ideas So again, I think it's really hard on parents always feeling that they've got to be the ones initiating everything, thinking of things, looking out for opportunities. Circle support can just bring other people into that kind of thinking. And it can be anyone really, anyone that has that commitment, whether it's family, friends, neighbours, someone who's paid to support, people who know about useful things. So if someone's thinking about getting a job, you know, circle support could involve people who maybe have their own business or, you know, work in the local industry or something where there might be an opportunity. And again, I'd go back to that idea of including people of a similar age. So you have that age range within that, within that circle of support. And I think circle support can do many things. You know, they can help people with finding work, with moving house. They can really help with building friendships and connections. So that's just what I was going to say a little bit about. So, you know, if a group of people maybe want to come together, they may be able to help. They may suggest new things. They may share their own interests. They may suggest, you know, going somewhere with someone and helping people connect with other people with that interest. And this idea of circles of support, I think they're so useful for longer term future planning. And they could, you know, it's not that everyone who becomes a member of circle of support will stay involved, you know, for the rest of their life, but some people might, and they might just continue in that sort of planning, keeping an eye on things, advocating role when parents are no longer able to do that. And that's why I think those siblings, those nieces and nephews, you know, getting them, if you can, a little bit more involved in a person's life is really helpful. And I know some siblings are very involved, some nieces and nephews are very involved. So this is a tool that I think is really useful to help think about some of this. I mean, hopefully some of you are familiar with this. I think lots of services use this now, particularly in preparing for adulthood. But it's often called a relationship map. I call it People in My Life. But it's a way of mapping the people that are in a person's life and then helping that to shape what you might want to do. So the idea is the person name or photo goes in that middle circle, and then the people closest to them go in that inner circle, people further out go in the outer circle. And then I've divided this into 4 different groups of people. That sometimes that varies slightly, but you can hopefully read that and get the idea of that. So I should say this is a template from Thinking Ahead, and with all the templates, you can, if you download them and save them, you can actually, this has got text boxes in it, so you can write you can write on this, and then you can save it on your computer. So you don't have a piece of paper, you know, that might get lost. You've got it somewhere safe. But you can also update it, or you can share it with other people. Say if you were talking to siblings, you know, other siblings, you might say, oh, look, this is what we've been doing. Do you want to add thoughts to it, or whatever? So it's a way of just sharing the information you're gathering. So a lot of the templates are about this information gathering that can be shared with other people. So this is just I think often these maps are used, but they're used just to record people. What I find them really useful for is, one of the things is looking at where the gaps are. And then if there are gaps and you think, oh, hang on, we've got a bit of a gap there. It might be that's what the person wants. They want that gap there. But if they would like more people in that bit, say with friends or with you know, neighbours and people in the community, it's a way of then thinking, well, how do we think about how we get more people in that part of a person's life? Another use, really valuable, is sharing it with others. Obviously, if the person's happy with that, such as sort of people like PAs and support workers, so they then see someone being part of a circle, a network of people, and help people to keep in touch with those people. And, you know, if people move on, not losing contact. College, I often hear, you know, Christine had a good friend at college, but no longer sees them. So then think about where the gaps are and plan if you want to build new connections there. And the other thing that I think is really useful is the last point about people who are in the outer areas. Why are they in that outer area? I mean, it might be just the person isn't that, you know, attached to them, but it might be they actually do really get on with them. They just don't often see them. A family member, maybe they just see them at Christmas. So how do you make more, say, time for them to spend a bit of time together, even if that's on Zoom or something like that? Or just, you know, at Christmas, if that's where they are only going to see them, then, you know, do they get a bit of one-to-one time? Just build a bit of a relationship up there. So it's the idea of, you know, pulling people into that centre circle so people have got a much closer network of people around them. I was using this tool yesterday with some staff. Well, I showed it to them a few weeks before, and I went back. One of the things I'd asked them to do in the meantime was do this, and it really changed their thinking. So these tools may be useful for you, but also if your son or daughter is being supported by people, encourage them to use it, because it really helped them to think differently about people's lives. So I mentioned I'm thinking ahead how to be part of the world of work. So I'm just going to talk briefly about this, but it has got ideas about community connecting in it. And obviously work is one of those ways of building a support network around people. So this is another easy read guide. And it was written for all ages, again, secondary school, college and adults, but also for parents and family carers who want to support their relative into work and do it sort of gradually, not a sort of big thing post-school, college, but actually a much more gradual process, just exploring ideas and thinking about how it might work for someone. And again, then anyone supporting someone. So, support work. Preparing for adulthood, teams have been using it. So again, encourage other people to use it if you think that would be appropriate. So the messages in the guide, there are quite a lot of them, but just the ones relevant to what we're talking about now is about getting to know your local community, including the jobs people do. But I would say for anyone, getting to know their local community is a really good way of building these networks and community connections. And one of the things is just being seen in your local community and letting people know that you're, this is in relation to work, but it could be in relation to sharing your interests or meeting people with your interests. It's just actually being seen, telling people, oh, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm keen to do, which, if it is looking for work, it could lead to things like getting some voluntary experience or just building a connection with, say, a community centre or something like that. But also it's encouraging people to talk to other people, about work, that they know, find out what people do. Just ask people about their jobs. Again, we ask people, do you want to work? But how do they know even what a job looks like? But actually, if people are chatting to their family or, places where they go, if they go to a club or something like that, chatting to people about what their job is, finding out about that, and chatting to maybe local people with businesses or people who have jobs locally and finding out what they do, what that looks like, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. And again, building on people's real skills and gifts, which a lot of people with learning disabilities are really good at things. Letting people know what you're good at and how can that translate into contributing in your local community or leading to work experience or work. So I won't go into this in a lot of detail, I'm just a bit conscious of time, but there are ideas about getting to know your local community and businesses. And I won't go through those. Some of these ideas came through a parent in Shropshire who'd done a lot of work with her daughter around some of this thinking. So one of the things she suggested was, are there things happening in your community, such as fun runs or festivals that you could join in or help out at? So she'd actually really supported her daughter to do those things, and she'd become, quite involved in her local community and involved in local events. But there's more detail. If you're interested in this, do download this guide. There's lots of ideas there. The one thing I was going to talk a bit about was, it's a bit skew with picture, but this is my community map. I live in Charlton, in Greenwich. And the idea of community mapping is that you make a map of your local area. I did this through Google Maps. I printed off Google Maps, made it into a A3 sheet, and then I put some of the things in that I like in my local area or things that I want to go and explore. But it's just to give people an idea, there's a community centre. Oh, actually they've got a cafe. Oh, they've got a gym class. Just go, going, exploring, talking to people there, finding out a bit more about what they do. So about the community mapping, at the back of the work guide, there's it's not an easy read. There's a couple of pages about community mapping. It's talking about in relation to work, but it just gives you the idea of what community mapping is. And again, I think over the years, this has been a really good way of people having a different kind of sort of social network. And this is another tool that I think has really made a difference. And actually, families have really liked this when I've done workshops. So this isn't in the Thinking Ahead guide, but I introduced it once, and then families really liked it. So I've included it when I'm talking about this. And this is it goes back to a bit what I said before about, sorry, I'm just going to get through. People going to places with maybe with a PA, a support worker, and then coming back again, and really just having done that activity. And it starts at the bottom of the page, and then it's a gradual path up to having more involvement. So I put an example there, but you could translate it into any activity maybe that your relative does, and then thinking, how can they have more of a presence there? How can they, who do they speak to when they go there? Then is there an opportunity to have more conversations with people? They have a cup of tea with someone, whatever it might be, or are they able to contribute? So examples of that, maybe like someone goes to church, or I'm just going to church, can they do something like maybe hand out the hymn books when people arrive at the church and be part of welcoming people? Or could they help with a fair trade cafe or whatever at the end of the service, something like that. So there's lots of different examples of that I think it's really nice, because it doesn't require more resources. It's actually using the resources people have, and it just builds up more people who say hello, more people who know you in your local area. So that isn't available to download because it's not, but if anyone's interested, I can send just a document with that in if people would like it. Or you could just draw your own from that image. I've sent the slides to Merton Mencap as a PDF, so there's sort of 3 slides on a page, so you can just they'll send them out to you. You can use those to use the links, etc. So one of the other things that I often say about friendships and having a support network is the Care Act actually does recognise this as a need, and that's what I say. I don't think it really is given enough priority when people do support planning, do assessments and support planning. So the Care Act actually recognise that importance of it and being connected with family and friends as well as the wider community. And one of the eligibility outcomes in the Care Act is developing and maintaining a family and other personal relationships. So it's something to be aware of. And if this is something that's important, do ask for this at reviews or assessments, that this is part of a care and support plan. And then I'm not going to read all this out, but you'll get this slide. This is the additional information in the Care Act about the eligibility criteria. And I think a lot of people with learning disabilities do fall within this this eligibility criteria. So again, if it's an area where you think might be useful, you've got this. This is actually taken from the Care Act. And I've sort of said this, but I think it can never be repeated enough, really. The role of support workers and PAs. If your son or daughter does, or your relative does have, paid support, give information to paid supporters and have the expectation they will maintain and build friendships. They need to be doing this. It's not, paid supporters do usually move on. What we need to try, they need to take a role in trying to build other people into a person's life who will continue maybe when they've left. And if you are looking at support providers and making a choice about people, or you're using a support provider, just ask them, do you provide training to staff on building friendships and connections? It's something I think should just be as important as any other training that people get, really, because it does keep people safe, it does keep people well, it gives people skills and confidence. So that's the end of that section. That was a real whiz. Again, you should probably spend about 2 hours going through that in much more slow way, and people getting a bit more involved. But have you? I don't know. Do you want to stop the? Okay. So the last main section of the guide I was going to talk about was housing support, and this is the section 6 in the blue Thinking Ahead Family Guide. and it gives families background information to sort of think about what housing might look like. So again, it's not what's available in your local area. These are national guides, so they're just trying to help families understand it. I do think with this section on housing support, I would say it's one of the ones that feels a little bit more dated, because I think things have changed a lot about housing and support and how it's provided. In a way, I think people's options maybe feel a bit more limited than they did when I wrote this. But anyway, it's still useful to look at it, because not everyone fits into the box that a local authority wants to offer. So it's good to at least be familiar with options that can be available. So it's divided into options that may currently be available in your local area and options for arranging something new. And it also talks about family investment, inheriting family homes, because that's often a question that comes up. It's also information about tenancies and successions with tenancies. So just to give you a bit of an idea, options that currently exist, these are the ones it covers: a shared house, so there's something that's called group homes, shared lives, which I don't know whether you have that in Merton. It's where people live with within another family or with another person in their home. So the idea of core and cluster, this probably has changed in its meaning, but has become more popular now. Intentional communities, that's things like Camp Hill and Marsh, which people might have heard of, and networks where people live in their own flats usually, but are supported by, supported to be connected actually. The main organisation that does this is Keyring. So again, I don't know if you have Keyring in Merton. That's for people who can live fairly independently, but are likely to feel lonely, need low level support. So there's a worker in that local area that connects people up and arranges to meet people and gives people low level support. So what it does in the guide explains what that term means, explains how the support will be organised, it explains things it gives you things to consider. So, if your son or daughter likes this or that, it might not work so well, or they might, that might really work for this reason. And then sort of links to go to further places. I think some of those places, some of those resources aren't so available now. It probably is a priority to update this section. It still is useful though. Options for arranging something new, so that talks about renting a flat or house on a person on their own, shared or outright ownership, including hold mortgages, which you may have heard about, private sector leasing, and family investment, including inheriting family home. So it's an organisation, it's not a huge organisation, it's a small organisation called the JMS Trust that does help. Its mission is to support families who are looking to set something new up. It did give funding. I noticed, I checked, its grant giving is closed at the moment, but they still say we can give you information and advice about setting something up, and the funding might become available again in the future. But just if you want, that is something to explore if you're interested. So this is, I'm thinking ahead, how to get the right housing and support. And I think, again, this has really opened up conversations and helped people think through some of these things. Again, not everyone will be able to use this or might need to use it in a different format, but it just gives you some of the ideas. Interestingly, in Essex, this social workers assessing people for housing are now, I'm not saying with everyone, but they are using this guide. I hear, someone came to a housing assessment and they brought this guide with them. So they've been sort of trained to use it and they're doing that. So one thing I was just going to say before I go through this section is, all I've been talking about, building friendships and community connections and support networks, could be really helpful information to think about to shape your answers in relation to some of these templates, or really it's the answers of your son or daughter, but what people think would be the answer to these things. So you'll see that as I go through. I do think all these sections, although they're separate, they all really connect. So, it's really useful looking at any of them then. So this section is divided up into 3 big questions. And one of the things, again, I think families said to me, oh, my son or daughter was asked at review meeting, do you want to leave home? And they just said, they just didn't have a clue how to answer it. And they either went yes or no, or they looked to their parent to answer. That it's just such a big question. What on earth does that mean? So this is a way of people exploring what leaving home might be like. What does it mean? Or moving house, what does it mean? So the big questions are, who do you want to live with? Where do you want to live? What help would you need? And then this is an example of who do you want to live with? So again, all these options aren't, everything isn't there. They're the main things that came up when we piloted it. But I won't go into detail, but it has been interesting, you know, some of the questions and how they've helped people to rethink things. Things like living with a pet. Again, I think, you know, probably people think, oh, you know, if you live in your own place, you can't have a pet. But actually, for some people, that pet is a lifeline. So if that is the case, then that is a crucial bit of information to know about. It might be the difference between someone managing on their own and someone not managing on their own. Yeah, so I think it's fairly self-explanatory. So sorry, that's just got covered up a bit, but where do you want to live? So this is divided into 3 smaller questions, and they're: what does the house flat need to be like? Who do I want to live near? And what do I want to live near? So it's those 2 last questions that really connect with the building friendships and support networks. If people know who's in that relationship map, if you know people and places that are important to a person, then in terms of somewhere to live, there is really no point someone going to live in a completely different area. So that might not be so important in Merton, which is a smaller borough. It's still important, but I think in large areas it's very true, large county councils. So what does the house flat need to be like? So these are just some of the, again, fairly self-explanatory, but thinking, you know, does someone really like an environment that's much more small and cozy, or do they actually need lots of space? Do they need a garden because, you know, they need somewhere they can go out and really, you know, run around, move around? Or, I mean, one person said, I really want to live somewhere without a garden, which I hadn't really thought about, but they didn't want any responsibility for an outdoor space. So it's just, again, they're not, you know, there might well be other examples, but the space to add those in there. Then this fits with what I was talking about before. What do you want to live near? So are you really connected, say, with a place of worship? Is there someone you like to go and visit and you need to be near a bus stop, or you work at a train station to get there? Do you need to be near a health centre? I mean, I knew someone that needed to be near a hospital. Basically, you know, they had to look for property near a hospital because their epilepsy wasn't controlled, and they just suddenly needed to get to hospital in an emergency, and you know, it needed to be 5 to 10 minute drive to get there. So that, again, I think those are all self-explanatory. Depends on what's important to people, and those sort of questions are in the how to plan section, which I haven't covered today. So then it's making a plan. You know, what are the, from those discussions, sort of, if someone really is serious at this point, really thinking about moving, this isn't such an important question if someone isn't, but what are the most important things about where I want to live? What are the things that I must have? And then what are the things I'd like to have, but I can compromise on? Because what often comes up is people talk about, you know, this raising people's expectations. But I think, you know, we all need to know there are some things, if we're going to live somewhere, these are really the things that I do really need. And I'd like these things, but I know that I'm not going to get all of them. So it's just having that kind of thinking. So it's not saying just because you tick a box saying I need to live near the bus stop that that's what you're going to get. But if that is really crucial, then, you know, it needs to be quite high up the list. I'm sure that all kind of makes sense. And then the last section is what I may need help with. So I wrote this really to help people think about what support they might need, and to sort of kind of have a realistic idea of this, because people can be unrealistic about, say, leaving home and what it might look like. I think all these questions, one of the first people to use it said, oh, it's made me, his mum said, oh, it's made him so much more realistic. He's had this dream about leaving home, but actually it made him think about it much more concretely. Oh, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and start to think about it a bit differently. This page, this has been used actually to help people think about just generally what they want to learn, which I think is interesting. I actually went to a school to do just to sit in on the planning they were doing with sixth formers, and they were using this to help people plan their goals for the final year. So again, I think it can just be, you know, this might be a different kind of conversation, much more gentle. This could be used in a much more gentle conversation, not about where, you know, moving home or moving where you do live. Just be, you know, are there things you'd like us to help you learn more about at this point in time? Yeah, so it's just nice seeing it being used like that. So I'm just going to say a few different things about housing as well. So in section 8 of the Thinking Ahead Guide for Families, the Blue Guide, there's a section called Keeping an Eye on Things. And some of it is about building up a relationship with support providers, but I think a big part of it is information about what to consider when choosing somewhere to live and or support. So it's a bit of a checklist, actually, like find out what the questions you could ask about the organisation, think about, the location and safety of property, think about, the questions you can ask about how support's arranged, and look at how you can sort of do a bit of an assessment of the quality of support. Again, I think things have changed a bit since I wrote this, because I think we were much more optimistic about the quality of support, say, 10, 12 years ago. And now, as one parent already said, Fiona, I think it was, it's really hard to get support. So, it feels there's a lot more compromise about this, but it's still, it's good to know what your standards are, what you want, and to know what you're judging things against. So that might be a useful section to look at if you are looking at using, a support provider, whether it's housing or not. And one of the things that I don't think is known enough about is the REACH standards for supported living. So most local authorities do push for supported living now, which isn't a bad thing. It's a really good model. It can work for anyone with mild learning disabilities to profound and multiple learning disabilities. It's all about the quality of support. But these are the REACH standards. So they were developed, there's a link in the next slide, they were developed by an organisation called Paradigm. And they've been used for, I don't know, maybe 20 years, I think. They were updated a few years ago. But in Kingston, I had a contract to quality check the support in supported living, but also then in day services and residential, etc. But we use these REACH standards. So I employ people with learning disabilities as quality checkers, and we use these REACH standards to go and look at people's lives. So I think they're really good for families to know about. If you go onto the website, here's the link. There's this guide, so it's not just a list like that. It explains what you might look for under each of those sections. So again, if you're thinking about housing, I would look at the REACH standards. They should be relevant really in if you're looking at any other model other than supported living as well, but it might not be as easy for choice. There's less choice often in residential care. You can't choose who you live with, etc. But they're really good things just to know about. And I'm surprised how few people know about the REACH standards. And even the place I was at yesterday with workers, providing residential and supported living, they didn't know about the REACH standards. So I mentioned this guide earlier on. It's called Shaping My Future, a guide for people with physical disabilities in Essex. So there's a section there called My Home. You can see actually on the left, there's the list of all the sections in the guide. And so this isn't easy read or anything. It's written for people with physical disabilities. That's what it's talking about. But I think there's lots of snippets of information, maybe more than snippets, that are useful for families of people with learning disabilities. And not, most of it is national information. There's just some local links to Essex services. So I think it is very useful. So this is got some more up-to-date information about some of the way housing works. It's got useful information about aids and adaptations, useful for anybody. So yeah, it might be useful to look at that. Again, this isn't available. Well, it might go onto my website. At the moment, it's on the Essex website. The link's on the next page, and you can just download this section. It's again the full guide, or download the section individually. So this is the content. Your rights in relation to housing. It summarises housing options. It's a bit like what I talked about, but it's slightly more geared to disabled people, physically disabled people. As that's, I said, equipment and adaptations. I think the support you can get from occupational therapy. That's for anyone that's nothing to do. If people need those things, and I think again we don't tap into enough of those things in learning disabilities. And the disabled facilities grant, etc. So, take a look at that if you are, on a serious path to thinking about where someone might live, or trying to think what might look right. Whoops. So I think what I'll do is I'll just go on, rather than stop and ask questions about that, I will just quickly talk about the growing older. information, because I know we put that on the publicity, and if anyone's actually thought that was the main thing they want, I don't want us not to have time for it, and then we can pick up questions about the housing or discussion about anything generally afterwards. So again, actually, this was, as Sally knows, people at Leighton, people in Merton were involved in the development of this. So I did actually, Sally connected me with Leighton Road, and I worked with a group of people there and one of the workers, and looked at ideas that might go into this training pack. So this was Pavilion. It's a national organisation that they've got a vast range of health and social care resources. So they're mostly aimed at practitioners. So they contacted me and asked me if I'd do a resource around growing older. So it is a guide that's aimed at support providers, but actually I think you know, other people can use it to actually think about the quality of support people should be getting. And really how I've written it is that it improves the quality of life for people as they grow older through good support. And it's really thinking about how do people have a good quality of life as they get older, and not just, oh, they're getting older, therefore they can't do this, that and the other. And life maybe shrinks a bit. And it provides good practice ideas to support people to have an active and enjoyable life whilst also feeling safe and well. So what do you need to look after your health and well-being as you get older, but also what do you need to actually continue the friendships and all those things we've talked about, and do the things you enjoy. And one of the main things I think about this, these materials, is that it really encourages conversations about growing older. And I did expect that's what I was really talking to people at Leighton Road about. You know, what did they want people to think about for them as growing older? How did they want to talk about growing older? And I did that with a number of other groups of people and individuals, and it really informed what's the materials that's in there. So there is a link to the guide there, but this is the one thing that isn't free. Everything else I've talked about is free on the Together Matters website, but this is a Pavilion resource, and there is a cost involved. But so there's this training pack that is, if you do, you know, if your son or daughter is being supported by someone, and they are, you know, the people there are growing older, it's a useful training pack for that organisation to have, and they can train their staff in it. It's all sort of laid out for someone just to deliver the training to a staff team. I mean, I also do that training, but if, you know, you might want to advocate that the support provider is better at supporting people as they grow older if your son or daughter's left home. But the one thing I think is useful for families is this self-study guide. So I think this is about £15. I can't quite remember. I think it's under £20 anyway. But I think this is actually really useful for parents. A number of parents have bought it and said it really helped them to be clear what, not just a support provider, but what they should be saying they wanted their son or daughter's life to look like as they grew older. So these are the 6 sections. Understanding growing older is actually getting the practitioners and staff to sort of understand what it's like for people with learning disabilities to grow older, and not to make assumptions about this. Then the topics in life are emotional well-being, health, being active and involved, home life, and bereavement and dying. So it's set out as sort of exercises, you know, information, and then exercises to think about it and sort of challenge people a bit, and then think how they might implement some of this stuff in the service they provide. But as I say, I think staff could families, like saying being active and involved, is that, are you doing X, Y, and Z? Could you do X, Y, and Z? This would be good if you were thinking about things like this. And this could be a day service, a supported living, whatever, or, you know, someone has a PA, how a PA could be working. So, I don't know why everything keeps clicking forward. So talking to people about growing older. So this was one of my big things, that people really don't talk to people about growing older. And I think people are aware that things are changing in their life, and it can feel difficult, worrying, but they don't even necessarily know that's associated with growing older. And so in the guide, as much as possible, it's encouraging opportunities to talk or help people understand about what might help them as they grow older. So this is just one example, like finding out what makes someone feel good about their life. This is just, sorry, it's a bit of a clip from the guide, but and start with that. And then what you do is build, if people are saying this is what makes me feel good about my life, you know, making sure that that can be held on to as much as possible, that it continues, or how can you adapt it so that doesn't get lost? Or if it's no longer possible, someone ages to do that, what can they do that's similar? So you build that in, so you hang on to the things that make people feel good about their life. And then what does someone find worrying or difficult in their life as they get older? And then actually, you know, being proactive about finding solutions to that, which might be, you know, like information, explaining what's happening, or reducing or removing that difficulty. So it's a bit of a nutshell, but I mean, there's lots of ideas in there. It's really that approach. Let's not just assume these, you know, there's an inevitable decline, which is, as we know, affects people with learning disabilities often more than other people. But I think that's actually because a lot of this talking and thinking isn't happening. Whoops, I've got something here that's just slipping on the slides. So one of the things again, is like good support for healthy aging. So I just thought I'd give you, like, this is a diagram from there. So it's got these three circles are all talked about in a lot more detail, to actually think about, this is what good support looks like for healthy aging. So there's a whole list of common health problems when growing older, and sort of helping people think, oh yes, these are the things we need to look out for. So there's preventing ill health and reducing risks of serious health problems. And I think part of that is good support in middle age, in adult life. And if we do some of those things, like, you know, healthy eating, exercise, etc., people getting the health checks they need, then they will have a better likelihood of getting to older age with having reduced some of those risks. And obviously getting the right healthcare in later life. So there's information on all those three topics. That's what the health section is all about. And then this guide was actually written before I did the pavilion. So this is where this idea of really people talking, being given the opportunity to think about what growing older means to them. Something I developed with an OT who really liked, an occupational therapist who really liked, was very good, had lots of skills, something she'd done for years, developing activities. And she'd done a lot of that around people growing older, you know, without learning disabilities, not people with learning disabilities, and also, but also people with dementia. So we sort of adapted that work she'd been doing to try out, again, we piloted it with some groups of people, tried out these different activities and found out what they liked and what worked, what helped them talk about these things and think about it. So it's not time, this is a huge topic. But again, this is free on the website, but there's lots of, well, there's 20 activities there. They're really structured, but again, they don't need to be structured in the way they are. It felt, you know, a bit of a day service, say, wanted to pick up on them, or a day service could pick up on them and deliver that activity without having to do much planning and thinking. It's sort of setting it all out, what you might need, etc., to do it and how to do it. So that was really a bit of a quick whiz through growing older, but I think it's something often on people's minds and useful to just say that's there. Again, it's a huge topic that you know, requires a lot longer. And then the other resources, again, these are free on the website, that I think just generally are really helpful if you're thinking about any of the things I've talked about. There's two things around. They're really, as it says there, about people having annual reviews. Again, this came out for work in Kingston. We're aware that people's annual reviews weren't really helping them think about making changes. People with learning disabilities and their families were finding them very frustrating. They left the meeting and felt we didn't talk about what mattered. So these were ways of really trying to address that and help people to be involved in the meeting as much as they are able to or would like. So that's the one on the right. So if your son or daughter relative finds meetings difficult, then that one on the right might just really help you think about some ideas about, you know, thinking what might work for them. I think it's very useful. People say we've got social anxiety, find meetings really stressful, or people who really have profound learning disabilities and not really able to communicate what they want. And then the one on the left, template for your annual review. It's just really a very simple kind of person-centered planning tool, what's working and what could be better. So I'll just show you the next slide, which has that. So it's really to help people prepare. So it could be for any meeting, any review meeting, assessment, or just a meeting about how's things going. What do I want to do after college, etc. So this is just one page. So it's got a list of all different aspects of people's lives down the left-hand side. What my week looks like, where I live. It's got health, friendships, all the things you'd expect to be there. And then so your thoughts about what's working well and thoughts about what could be better. So again, this can be used interactively, so it can be all text boxes. So me is the person themselves, the family can write their views, and any support worker, support provider can write their views. And then that gives quite a nice sense. If it doesn't all have to be filled in, it might just be yourself as a family and the person, your son or daughter, just fill it in. But then you go along much more prepared. That thoughts about what's working well, maybe you don't need to talk about those things at the review, but actually thoughts about what could be better. There might be a few areas that you really identify, this is really what's not working. So you take this along and you say, or you email them beforehand, we've done this, we've prepared this information, we really want the review or the meeting, whatever, to focus on this. It just stops that real frustration. And as we all know, reviews don't often happen now. And then when you do get the chance to review, it needs to be, you really need to capitalize on it. But it's a way for just thinking, well, this isn't working. We need to go, we're very happy with X, Y, and Z, but we're not happy with A, B, or A. We want to go and sort that out. So it's just a way of, it's a real reflection tool, I think, really, in preparing yourself for discussions with people. So this is what I said at the start. Well, I forgot to say at the start, but all the resources apart from that pavilion training are available from Together Matters. And I think Tahina's put that in the message box, chat box. And as I said, there's a version to download that you can read or print it. Then there's this interactive version, which you need to just download and save it. And once you save it, the text boxes appear. And you can that's really easy to update it, keep information up to date. And you can share it with others. And all the things are available as sections or as the full version. And there's my email address if you've got any queries or comments or ideas or thoughts about anything.